So the first topic that I wanted to talk about, really, and it seems to be the most important one, is corporations, like megacorps. The way that the world is, what your high street is like, because in some ways it's not so terribly different, right? I mean, when we grew up, there were, of course, large international corporations. You could go to a shopping center or mall, however you want to call it, and you would find brand names, right? But you would also find lots of things that weren't, like, international brands. Although even then, this was becoming more the exception rather than the norm. But in your high street, you'd have lots of different shops that were locally owned, and only a few giant, mega stores. Of course, now that's just not the case, right? It's very difficult anywhere really. You've got to go to somewhere like Bristol or Bath or somewhere like that, where these things are kind of valued to find it. If you go other way, go to other places, and it's really just convenience stores and just maybe like personal services or something. But this wasn't always the case. And Generation X had a particular view of corporations, which was almost entirely negative, because they did represent a kind of oncoming homogenizing force that we understood was not evil, but there was a kind of evil contained within it, right? It was kind of a kind of banal evil. It was like, well, if you've got to be trapped in that kind of life, then I mean, it is the rat race. It is like being in a cage, being in a cubicle, and being under someone else's thumb, right? This was really what it was all about. And so, it was really considered a form of selling out to be like, right, I'll join a mega corporation. I'll just, do the dull work, take the paycheck, and just, work my way up the ladder. And there was something spiritually empty about that the Gen Xers recognized. It was not good to sell out to a corporation. And ironically, though, our entire cultural life was kind of sold out to these corporations. Like, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the 90s kid with his Nintendo and his sneakers, and posters of consumer goods on the walls and all that. And it's just like, yeah, we were kind of trapped in the maelstrom, but we at least realized that this wasn't a good place to be, right? And so you didn't want to be this corporate drone. If possible, and it was possible, you could create for yourself like an independent life. This was a lot more possible then than it is now, right? And just by way of comparison, corporate culture doesn't seem to be resisted by millennials at all. It seems to be totally embraced with them. And you can see how they've changed corporate culture. So now it's adult daycare. You've got red wine at tap on Twitter. Well, probably not anymore, actually. And the way that in Google, you're expected to essentially live your entire life at the office. To me, as someone who is looking essentially down on the millennials from a position of age, I look at that and think that's just disgusting and gross and dysfunctional. Like, it's the complete corporate capture of a person. And I can't remember what I was reading the other day. It was some article or watching some video about it. But the corporate culture of somewhere like Google it's expected that you will spend almost all of your time at the office, and sometimes even sleep at the office. And so they've got all of these adult daycare facilities there. But it's like, why the hell would you want that? Leave the office, have a family, have friends, have a life outside of your job, right? I think what it is the millennial genuflection towards power. They think that power is all that legitimizes. And in a way, you can see why they would end up thinking that. I mean, their entire sort of generational philosophy is focused around power, social justice. You can't define anything without power. And it's entirely materialistic. So if I'm if I'm in the seat of power and I have all of my needs taken care of, and I'm being given lots of money, and I've got, food on tap, glorious food on tap, then surely I have won at life and I have everything that there is. But the thing is, I mean, look at the depression rates among the millennials. They are desperately sad, they're getting older, and they realize actually maybe there is something more to life than merely material excess. And so Generation Z to me seems to be bifurcated between these two positions, right? Corporations are at once terrible, but they're also incredibly normal, and everyone is involved with them, and they can be preaching the right social message if that's the kind of Zoomer that you are. But the option for an independent life looks to me like the Gen Zers think it's just out of reach. It's just an unrealistic goal, like owning a house. It's an unrealistic goal, and it's a totally fair response to the environment in which they find themselves, right? It's totally fair. And I don't doubt that I would have felt the same way were I growing up now, were I in that position now. And it's just so different to how it used to be. Because back in the boomers' day, having a small business was practical and profitable. In fact, it was probably useful. And you've got to remember, like in my dad's era, my dad being a boomer, the small businesses were like family run. And the people who worked there for a long time, like decades. And now nobody, like the people like belonged there, right? They became part of the furniture. And so like in my generation's day, it was still desirable to be a small businessman, but corporations were growing too large and you didn't really stay in any one place for very long. You might spend, 5 or 6 years at one place or, whatever. That would be fairly long. But now it just looks like the Gen Zers are kind of just floating between gigs and like they're part of like the gig economy. And it doesn't come as much of a surprise to me now that social media influencer is what young people call the most desirable career, because in a way that's a kind of return to the independent businessman that the boomers had allowed to just vanish out of existence. It's the closest they're going to get to being a small business owner and working for themselves. And ultimately that is a much more desirable life than being the corporate office drone. So, and I'll talk about that more in a minute as well, because this is just one of those things where it's like, it's remarkable how much that loomed over my generation and still looms over my life now, actually. I think about it. I have been through it and I hated it. I really hated it. And for some reason, the millennials are just fine with it. And I can only assume it's because they view the world in power relations and think, okay, well, if I'm getting to the point of power, then that's fine. Anyway. There's also another problem, which is another difference, which is that Generation Z seem to be lacking this kind of unifying culture that at least my generation, and probably not the millennials either, but I mean, there is some kind of unifying culture in the millennial generation, I think. But certainly in my generation, there was a kind of unifying culture, which was a product of, frankly, having limited options for which to imbibe cultural products. But now it's all social media. But the problem with social media is it's incredibly siloed. There are going to be people you don't know about who have got millions of followers that you just have no idea about because it's in like a fandom that is totally alien to you, you're completely blind to. And I don't know what the consequence of that is. Who knows? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. I can't see how it can be a good thing because there's something about being exposed to things that you don't have an interest in that I think is good for you. It gives you a broader perspective and it at least gives you a frame of reference for the people around you. Because I was thinking about this the other day. If everyone's just on their smartphone and everyone's feeds are just so totally different, you could end up at a point where you can't really properly communicate with the people around you. They'll give you some kind of internet jargon from a particular fandom, a particular thing, and you'll just be like, well, that doesn't match up with any of the jargon I use in my particular ones. And so essentially it's a process of continual alienation and isolation, even though you're going to be sat on a bus like with dozens of people around you and none of you have got anything in common. And so that strikes me as being a negative thing.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.